The morning sun cast long shadows across the corridors of Buckingham Palace, as Commander James Harrison adjusted his ceremonial uniform one final time. After 32 years of faithful service to the crown, he had never imagined he would find himself in such a position. The weight of the conversation he was about to have pressed heavily on his shoulders as he walked toward the Queen Consort's private quarters. Harrison had served under 3 generations of the royal family. He remembered the late Queen Elizabeth's grace and dignity, her unwavering commitment to duty, and most importantly, her meticulous care of the crown jewels. Each piece held centuries of history, tradition, and meaning that went far beyond their monetary value. They were symbols of the British monarchy itself, passed down through generations with sacred trust. The trouble had begun 3 months earlier when the royal household conducted its annual inventory of the crown jewels. Several pieces that should have been in the Tower of London's secure vaults were missing, not the most famous pieces like the Imperial State Crown or the Cullinan diamonds, but smaller, equally significant items that had belonged personally to Queen Elizabeth. A sapphire brooch that had been a wedding gift from Prince Philip, a pair of pearl earrings worn by Queen Victoria, a delicate diamond tiara that had graced the late Queen's head during state visits. Initially, the missing items had been attributed to administrative oversight. Perhaps they had been moved for cleaning or appraisal and simply not logged properly. The palace staff conducted thorough searches, checked every vault, every safe, every secure storage area. Days turned into weeks and the missing jewelry remained unaccounted for. It was during this time that Harrison began to notice troubling patterns. Security footage showed Camilla entering the jewelry storage areas on multiple occasions, always accompanied by her personal assistant, Margaret Wells. These visits occurred during unusual hours and were not documented in the official logs. When questioned, Camilla claimed she was simply familiarizing herself with the collection, as was her right as Queen Consort. Harrison's suspicions deepened when he overheard a conversation between Margaret Wells and an unknown caller. She was discussing discreet valuations and private collectors who appreciate historical significance. The conversation ended abruptly when she noticed Harrison nearby, but the damage was done. A respected royal guard who had dedicated his life to protecting the crown was beginning to suspect the unthinkable. The breaking point came when Harrison received a tip from Thomas Mitchell, a veteran jeweler who had worked with the royal family for decades. Mitchell reported that he had been approached by an intermediary asking about the possibility of creating exact replicas of several pieces from the crown jewels collection. The descriptions matched perfectly with the missing items. When Mitchell refused and asked questions, the intermediary quickly withdrew the request. Harrison knew he faced an impossible situation. Accusing the Queen Consort of theft would create a scandal that could shake the very foundations of the monarchy. But allowing the theft of crown jewels would be a betrayal of everything he had sworn to protect. The weight of tradition, duty, and loyalty pressed down on him as he considered his options. After sleepless nights and careful consideration, Harrison decided he had no choice but to act. He gathered every piece of evidence he could find: security footage, timestamps, visitor logs, witness statements, and Mitchell's testimony. He documented everything with the precision of a man who understood that his career, reputation, and possibly his freedom hung in the balance. The palace corridors seemed longer than usual as Harrison made his way to Camilla's quarters that morning. Servants bowed respectfully as he passed, unaware of the storm that was about to break over the royal household. Harrison had requested a private audience with the Queen Consort, citing urgent security matters. Camilla had agreed, perhaps not realizing the true nature of what was to come. As he reached the ornate doors of her private sitting room, Harrison paused to collect himself. Inside, Camilla waited, dressed elegantly as always, her demeanor calm and regal. She had no idea that the loyal guard she was about to receive carried evidence that could destroy her reputation and position forever. Harrison knocked firmly on the door, his heart pounding with a mixture of duty and dread. The next few minutes would determine not only his own fate, but potentially the future of the British monarchy itself. As the door opened and he stepped inside, Commander James Harrison prepared to make the most difficult accusation of his distinguished career. Camilla looked up from her morning tea as Commander Harrison entered her private sitting room. The elegant chamber was decorated with fresh flowers and family photographs, creating an atmosphere of refined domesticity that seemed at odds with the gravity of Harrison's mission. She gestured graciously toward a chair across from her, but Harrison remained standing, his military bearing rigid with tension. "Your Majesty," Harrison began, his voice steady despite the enormity of what he was about to say, "I'm afraid I must discuss a matter of utmost sensitivity with you this morning. It concerns the security and integrity of the Crown Jewels collection." Camilla's expression remained composed, though Harrison noticed a subtle shift in her posture. "Of course, Commander. The Crown Jewels are a responsibility I take very seriously. What specific concerns do you have?" Harrison opened the leather portfolio he carried and withdrew several documents. 3 months ago, during our routine annual inventory, we discovered that several pieces from the collection are missing. These are not merely absent from their expected locations, but completely unaccounted for despite extensive searches. "I see," Camilla replied, setting down her teacup with deliberate care. "Surely such discrepancies occur from time to time. Perhaps the pieces are being cleaned or appraised." "That was our initial assumption, Your Majesty. However, our investigation has revealed more troubling facts." Harrison's voice grew firmer as he continued. "The missing items include Queen Elizabeth's personal sapphire brooch, the pearl earrings that belonged to Queen Victoria, and the Pembroke tiara. These pieces were last officially documented in their secure locations on September 15th. Camilla's eyes narrowed slightly, but her voice remained steady. "I fail to see how this concerns me directly, Commander. Surely this is a matter for the palace security team to resolve." Harrison took a deep breath before delivering his next statement. "Your Majesty, security footage shows that you visited the jewelry storage areas multiple times during the weeks when these pieces went missing. These visits were not logged in our official records, which is highly irregular." For the first time, Camilla's composure showed signs of cracking. A flush of color rose in her cheeks and her hands tightened around her teacup. "I visited those areas as part of my duties as Queen Consort. I was familiarizing myself with the collection that I am now responsible for overseeing. The footage shows you removing several items from their storage cases," Harrison continued relentlessly, "items that matched the description of the missing pieces. Furthermore, we have testimony from Thomas Mitchell, the royal jeweler, that an intermediary approached him about creating replicas of these exact pieces." Camilla stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the polished floor. "Commander Harrison, I find your implications both insulting and inappropriate. Are you seriously suggesting that I, the Queen Consort, would steal from the Crown Jewels collection?" Harrison met her gaze steadily. "I am presenting facts, Your Majesty. Facts that demand an explanation. The Crown Jewels are not personal property to be disposed of at will. They belong to the British people and represent centuries of history and tradition." "How dare you?" Camilla's voice rose, though she maintained enough control to keep from shouting. "I have served this family and this nation faithfully. The suggestion that I would commit such a crime is preposterous." "Then where are the missing pieces?" Harrison asked directly. "If you can produce them or provide a reasonable explanation for their absence, this matter can be resolved quietly and discreetly." Camilla began pacing the room, her elegant composure finally beginning to unravel. "This is blackmail, Commander. You're threatening the Queen Consort based on circumstantial evidence and wild speculation. I'm doing my duty to protect the Crown Jewels, just as I have for over 30 years, Harrison replied firmly. "The evidence is substantial and more comes to light each day. Thomas Mitchell is prepared to testify about the approach made to him. Security footage clearly shows the timing of your visits correlating with the disappearances. You have no authority to make accusations against me," Camilla shot back, her voice growing more strained. "I could have you dismissed immediately for this insubordination." Harrison straightened his shoulders, fully accepting the risk he was taking. "You could indeed dismiss me, Your Majesty, but that would not make this matter disappear. The investigation will continue and eventually the truth will emerge. The question is whether you prefer to resolve this quietly and privately, or allow it to become a public scandal that could damage the monarchy irreparably." The room fell silent except for the steady ticking of an antique clock on the mantelpiece. Camilla stopped pacing and stared out the window at the palace gardens, her mind clearly racing through the implications of Harrison's words. The weight of centuries of royal tradition seemed to press down on both of them as they faced this unprecedented crisis. Finally, Camilla turned back to face Harrison, her expression a mixture of defiance and calculation. "What exactly are you proposing, Commander?" The next 24 hours passed like a carefully choreographed dance of desperation and damage control. Harrison had given Camilla until 6 o'clock the following evening to produce the recoverable pieces and provide full details about the sales that had already occurred. The palace continued its normal routine on the surface, but beneath the veneer of royal protocol, a crisis of unprecedented proportions was unfolding. Margaret Wells proved to be the weak link that unraveled the entire operation. When confronted by palace security with evidence of her phone calls and financial transactions, she broke down completely. In a tearful confession that lasted nearly 3 hours, she revealed the full scope of what had begun as a desperate attempt to solve Camilla's mounting personal debts. The scheme had started innocently enough. Camilla had asked Margaret to research the possibility of borrowing against some of her personal jewelry. When legitimate lenders proved unwilling to provide adequate funds, Margaret had suggested exploring more creative solutions. The idea of temporarily removing pieces from the crown jewels collection had emerged gradually, justified by the rationalization that they would be returned once Camilla's financial situation improved. Harrison listened to Margaret's confession with growing dismay. What had begun as a temporary loan against jewelry had evolved into outright theft when the debts continued to mount and the pressure to repay became overwhelming. The Swiss collector who had purchased Queen Victoria's pearl earrings was a notorious recluse who collected royal artifacts specifically because of their stolen provenance. Recovery would be virtually impossible without international legal intervention. By Wednesday afternoon, Camilla had produced the sapphire brooch and the Pembroke tiara from her safety deposit box. Harrison examined them carefully, his expert eye confirming their authenticity and checking for any damage. Both pieces appeared to be in perfect condition, their historical significance intact despite their temporary displacement from the royal collection. These represent 2/3 of the missing items, Harrison told Camilla as they met in a secure room deep within the palace. The pearl earrings remain the most serious problem. Without them, I cannot guarantee that this matter can be handled discreetly. Camilla looked haggard and exhausted, the stress of the past day having taken a visible toll. Margaret is trying to contact the intermediary who arranged the sale. She thinks there might be a possibility of buying them back, though the cost would be enormous. How enormous? Harrison asked, though he suspected the answer would be devastating. The collector paid £200,000 for them, Camilla admitted. Margaret estimates he would demand at least double that to sell them back, assuming he's willing to negotiate at all. Harrison absorbed this information with professional calm, though internally he was reeling. £400,000 was a staggering sum, far beyond anything the royal household could quietly absorb without attracting attention. "Do you have access to those funds?" Camilla shook her head miserably. "If I had that kind of money, I wouldn't have needed to sell the jewelry in the first place. My debts total nearly £600,000, and my creditors are becoming increasingly aggressive in their demands for payment." The scope of Camilla's financial crisis was becoming clearer, and Harrison began to understand how desperation had driven her to such extreme measures. "Your Majesty, how did your debts reach such a level? Your allowance from the royal household should be more than adequate for reasonable expenses." Camilla's face flushed with embarrassment and anger. "Reasonable expenses," she repeated bitterly. "Do you have any idea what it costs to maintain the appearance expected of a queen consort? The wardrobe requirements alone are staggering. Every public appearance demands a new outfit, and designer gowns cost tens of thousands of pounds each. Then there are the charitable donations, the gifts for state visits, the entertaining expenses that aren't covered by the official budget." Harrison listened with growing understanding. The royal family's financial arrangements were complex and often inadequate for the real costs of royal life. While their official expenses were covered, personal costs could spiral quickly, especially for someone trying to establish their legitimacy in a role that many believed they didn't deserve. "There are also the legal fees," Camilla continued, her voice growing more strained. "The ongoing litigation from Charles's previous relationships, the inheritance disputes, the media lawsuits. Everyone assumes the royal family has unlimited resources, but the reality is far more complicated." "Nevertheless," Harrison said gently but firmly, "these financial pressures do not justify the theft of crown jewels. These pieces belong to the British people, and represent centuries of history that cannot be replaced. Camilla nodded sadly. I know that now. I knew it then too, but I convinced myself it was temporary. I thought I could resolve my financial situation and return everything before anyone noticed. It was stupid and desperate and wrong. Harrison's phone buzzed with an urgent message. Margaret Wells had made contact with the Swiss collector's representative. The man was indeed willing to consider selling the pearl earrings back, but his price had already escalated to £500,000. Moreover, he demanded payment within 72 hours, or he would consider the matter closed permanently. We have a new deadline, Harrison told Camilla grimly. 3 days to produce £500,000, or Queen Victoria's pearl earrings disappear forever into a private collection. Camilla stared at him in despair. It's impossible. I don't have access to that kind of money, and I can't ask the royal household for it without explaining why it's needed. Harrison was quiet for a long moment, his mind racing through possibilities. The situation was becoming more complex by the hour, and the window for a discreet resolution was rapidly closing. Soon others would need to be brought into the crisis, and once that happened, the chances of keeping it private would disappear entirely. There may be one option, he said finally, but it would require complete honesty and cooperation from you, and it would mean accepting consequences that extend far beyond the return of the jewelry. Harrison's proposal was as shocking as it was desperate. He suggested that Camilla make a full confession to King Charles himself, revealing the extent of her financial troubles and the theft of the crown jewels. Only the king had the authority and resources to handle such a crisis, while maintaining some hope of keeping it from becoming a public scandal. Absolutely not. Camilla's response was immediate and fierce. Charles cannot know about this. It would destroy our marriage and my position. I would rather face criminal charges than tell him what I've done. Harrison studied her carefully, recognizing the terror in her eyes. Your Majesty, the king is going to find out eventually. The question is whether he learns about it from you in a controlled manner, or from investigators when this becomes a criminal matter. You don't understand, Camilla said, pacing frantically around the small room. Charles already has doubts about my suitability for this role. The press constantly questions whether I should be queen consort, whether I can live up to Elizabeth's legacy. If he discovers that I've stolen from the crown jewels, it will confirm every criticism that's ever been made about me. Harrison felt a wave of sympathy for the woman before him, but his duty remained clear. The king's personal feelings are secondary to the preservation of the monarchy itself. If these thefts become public knowledge without his prior awareness, the damage to the institution will be catastrophic. The afternoon wore on as they debated options that seemed increasingly hopeless. Margaret Wells continued her frantic attempts to negotiate with the Swiss collector, but his demands remained firm, and his patience was clearly limited. The clock was ticking toward a point of no return. It was during this crisis that an unexpected ally emerged. Sir Robert Fellows, the king's private secretary, and one of the most trusted advisors in the royal household, requested an urgent meeting with Harrison. Somehow, whispers of the investigation had reached his ears, and he demanded to know the full scope of the situation. Harrison found himself in an impossible position. His loyalty to the crown demanded honesty with the king's representative, but his promise to handle the matter discreetly conflicted with full disclosure. After careful consideration, he decided that the crisis had grown beyond his ability to manage alone. The meeting with Sir Robert took place in the king's private study, a room steeped in royal history and tradition. Harrison laid out the evidence methodically, watching as the king's private secretary absorbed the devastating implications of each revelation. When he finished, Sir Robert sat in stunned silence for several minutes. This is a disaster of unprecedented proportions, Sir Robert said finally. The queen consort stealing crown jewels is the kind of scandal that could bring down the monarchy. How have you managed to keep this quiet for so long? Harrison explained his attempts to resolve the matter privately, his hope that the jewelry could be recovered and returned without broader knowledge of the theft. I believed that protecting the institution was more important than pursuing punishment, provided the damage could be undone. Sir Robert nodded grimly. Your instincts were correct, Commander, but the situation has clearly escalated beyond private resolution. The king must be informed immediately. "What about the Swiss collector and Queen Victoria's pearl earrings?" Harrison asked. "We have less than 48 hours to meet his demands." Sir Robert was quiet for a long moment, clearly weighing options that were all problematic. The royal household has discretionary funds that could cover the cost, but authorizing such a payment would require documentation that would leave a permanent record of the transaction. "Is there any alternative?" "Perhaps," Sir Robert said slowly. "There are certain trusted individuals who have assisted the royal family with sensitive matters in the past. Private arrangements that allow for maximum discretion, but such assistance comes with its own costs and complications." Harrison understood the implication. The royal family had connections to wealthy supporters who could provide assistance in exchange for future considerations. It was a network that operated in the shadows of official protocol, handling problems that couldn't be addressed through normal channels. "What would be required?" Harrison asked. "Complete cooperation from the Queen Consort, absolute secrecy from everyone involved, and a guarantee that nothing like this ever happens again," Sir Robert replied. "The person I have in mind would expect assurances that go far beyond simple repayment." That evening, Camilla was summoned to a meeting that would determine her future. Sir Robert had arranged for a private collector and art dealer named Victoria Ashworth to meet with them. Ashworth was known for her discretion and her ability to recover stolen or misplaced items for wealthy clients who preferred to avoid public attention. Ashworth was a small, elegant woman in her 60s who spoke with the quiet authority of someone accustomed to handling the most sensitive situations. She listened to the details of the crisis without visible emotion, occasionally asking pointed questions about timelines and logistics. "The Swiss collector is difficult but not impossible to deal with," she said finally. "I've had dealings with him before. He's motivated by prestige more than money, and he particularly enjoys owning items that others cannot have. However, he can be persuaded to sell if the approach is handled correctly." "What would you require?" Camilla asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Ashworth's smile was cold and calculating. £500,000 to purchase the earrings plus my fee of £100,000. Additionally, I would expect certain considerations for my collection: access to royal events, introductions to specific individuals, and priority consideration should any other royal items become available for private sale in the future. The terms were steep and potentially dangerous, creating ongoing obligations that could compromise the royal family for years to come. But with time running out and no other options visible, Camilla found herself trapped between confession to her husband and submission to Ashworth's demands. As the meeting concluded, Harrison realized that the crisis was entering its final phase. One way or another, the next 24 hours would determine whether the scandal could be contained or would explode into the most damaging royal crisis in modern history. The final 24 hours unfolded with the precision of a military operation and the tension of a bomb waiting to explode. Victoria Ashworth had moved swiftly to contact her network of international dealers, while Sir Robert worked behind the scenes to arrange the necessary funding without leaving traces that could later expose the royal family's involvement. Harrison found himself at the center of a web of secrecy that grew more complex by the hour. Phone calls were made through encrypted channels, money was transferred through multiple accounts to obscure its origin, and documents were prepared that would officially record the recovery of the missing jewelry as the result of a routine security review rather than a theft investigation. Camilla spent the day in her private quarters, officially suffering from a minor illness that prevented her from fulfilling her public duties. In reality, she was paralyzed by anxiety and guilt, waiting to learn whether her desperate gamble would succeed or whether her world was about to collapse entirely. The breakthrough came at 3 o'clock in the afternoon. Ashworth called to report that the Swiss collector had agreed to sell Queen Victoria's pearl earrings back for the agreed price of £500,000. The transaction would take place in Geneva that evening, with the earrings to be delivered to London the following morning. He was surprisingly cooperative once I explained the historical significance of keeping the collection intact. Ashworth reported to Harrison over a secure phone line. I believe he was ultimately more interested in the prestige of having temporarily owned them than in keeping them permanently. Harrison felt a wave of relief so intense it was almost physical. "And the discretion aspect?" "Guaranteed," Ashworth replied. "He has as much interest in keeping this quiet as we do. His collection includes numerous items of questionable provenance, and he cannot afford scrutiny from international law enforcement. By evening, the missing pieces of the crown jewels were secure. The sapphire brooch and Pembroke tiara had been returned to their proper places in the Tower of London's vaults, while Queen Victoria's pearl earrings were en route from Geneva. To any outside observer, nothing had changed. The annual inventory had been completed, security protocols had been reviewed, and normal operations had resumed. But Harrison knew that everything had changed. The crisis had exposed vulnerabilities in both the royal family's financial arrangements and their security protocols that would require ongoing attention. More troubling, it had revealed the lengths to which desperation could drive even those at the highest levels of society. The final confrontation between Harrison and Camilla took place 3 days later, in the same sitting room where their crisis had begun. Camilla looked older and more fragile than she had a week earlier, the stress of recent events having taken a visible toll on her health and composure. "The jewelry has been returned and the matter is officially closed," Harrison reported. "All documentation reflects routine security procedures rather than theft and recovery. Your reputation and position remain intact." Camilla nodded gratefully, though her eyes remained haunted. "What happens now, Commander? Do we simply pretend this never happened?" Harrison considered his response carefully. "What happens now is that you live with the knowledge of what you've done and the consequences of your choices. The crown jewels are safe, but the debts that drove you to theft still exist. The pressures that led to this crisis haven't disappeared. I've arranged to consolidate my debts and establish a more reasonable payment schedule," Camilla said quietly. "Sir Robert has also helped me understand the resources available through the royal household for legitimate expenses." "This will never happen again." "I believe you mean that," Harrison replied. "But intentions aren't always enough when pressures mount and options seem limited. The real question is whether you've learned to ask for help before desperation drives you to desperate measures." Camilla was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the palace gardens where tourists gathered daily to glimpse the life of royalty. "I never imagined how isolating this position would be, or how difficult it would become to distinguish between what I needed and what I thought I deserved." Harrison felt a final wave of sympathy for the woman who had risked everything for temporary financial relief. "The crown jewels represent more than their monetary value, Your Majesty. They embody the trust placed in the royal family by generations of British people. That trust, once broken, can never be fully repaired." As Harrison prepared to leave, Camilla asked one final question. "Will you continue to serve as commander of the Royal Guard, knowing what you know about me?" Harrison paused at the door, considering his 3 decades of service and the oath he had taken to protect the crown. "I will continue to serve because the institution is larger than any individual, including both of us. But I will also continue to watch because vigilance is the price of maintaining the trust that has been placed in our care." 3 months later, the royal household announced that Commander James Harrison would be retiring with full honors after 32 years of distinguished service. His replacement was briefed on security protocols and procedures, but certain details of recent investigations remained classified at the highest levels. Camilla continued in her role as Queen Consort, fulfilling her public duties with the same grace and dignity expected of her position. To the outside world, nothing had changed. But those who knew the truth understood that the British monarchy had survived its closest brush with scandal in generations, saved only by the loyalty of a royal guard who chose duty over reputation, and the desperate cooperation of a queen consort who had nearly lost everything she had worked to achieve. The crown jewels remained secure in the Tower of London, their historical significance and symbolic power intact. But the crisis had served as a stark reminder that even the most sacred institutions are vulnerable to human weakness, and that the price of preserving tradition often requires difficult choices that leave no winners, only survivors. Harrison carefully placed his portfolio on the side table and faced Camilla directly. The morning light streaming through the tall windows cast sharp shadows across the room, emphasizing the tension that had settled between them like a heavy curtain. This was the moment that would determine whether the crisis could be contained or would explode into a scandal that could topple the monarchy. "I am proposing a simple solution." "Your Majesty," Harrison said, his voice carrying the weight of 3 decades of royal service. "The missing pieces must be returned to their rightful place in the crown jewels collection. within 48 hours. Quietly, discreetly, and without fanfare. In exchange, this matter will be treated as an administrative oversight rather than a criminal investigation. Camilla's laugh was bitter and sharp. Administrative oversight? Commander, you've just accused me of grand theft. You cannot simply pretend this conversation never happened. I can if the crown jewels are returned intact and undamaged, Harrison replied steadily. My loyalty is to the crown and the institution of the monarchy. I have no desire to see either damaged by scandal if it can be avoided. Camilla moved to her writing desk, her fingers drumming nervously on its polished surface. And if I refuse? If I maintain my innocence and demand that you prove these outrageous allegations? Harrison's expression remained unchanged, but his voice carried a note of steel. Then I will be forced to present my evidence to the Metropolitan Police and the royal household's legal team. The investigation will become official and eventually public. The media attention alone would be devastating, regardless of the final outcome. You're threatening me, Camilla said, her voice low and dangerous. I'm offering you a choice, Harrison corrected. The evidence against you is substantial and growing stronger each day. Margaret Wells has been under surveillance since we became suspicious. We know about her contacts with private collectors and her inquiries about discreet sales channels. We have phone records, financial transactions, and witness testimony. Camilla's face paled at the mention of her personal assistant. Margaret had been with her for 5 years, trusted with her most private affairs and confidential business. If Margaret was cooperating with the investigation, the situation was far worse than she had imagined. Margaret knows nothing, Camilla said quickly, perhaps too quickly. Then you admit there is something to know? Harrison pressed gently. Your Majesty, I understand the pressures you face, the expectations, the scrutiny, the financial demands of maintaining your position. But the crown jewels are not assets to be liquidated when circumstances become difficult. Camilla sank into her chair, the fight seeming to drain out of her. You have no idea what it's like, Commander. The constant judgment, the comparisons to Elizabeth, the whispers that I'm not worthy of this position. Every expense is scrutinized, every purchase questioned. Harrison felt a flicker of sympathy, but his duty remained clear. The British people respect the monarchy when it upholds its traditions and responsibilities. Selling off the crown jewels for personal gain would destroy that respect forever. They were just small pieces, Camilla said quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. Pieces that hadn't been displayed in years that most people didn't even know existed. I thought they wouldn't be missed. The admission hung in the air like a blade. Harrison had hoped for a denial, a reasonable explanation that would allow him to believe in Camilla's innocence. Instead, he was faced with a confession that confirmed his worst fears. Every piece of the crown jewels collection is catalogued and accounted for, Harrison said firmly. Their historical significance cannot be measured by their public visibility. That sapphire brooch was a personal gift from Prince Philip to Queen Elizabeth on their wedding day. The pearl earrings were worn by Queen Victoria during her Golden Jubilee. These are not mere trinkets to be sold to the highest bidder. Camilla looked up at him with red-rimmed eyes. I was desperate, Commander. The debts were mounting and I couldn't see any other way. I never intended for it to go this far. Harrison's training and experience told him to remain professional, but he couldn't help feeling a measure of pity for the woman before him. Your Majesty, where are the pieces now? Can they be recovered? Some of them, Camilla admitted reluctantly. The sapphire brooch and the tiara are in a safety deposit box. But the pearl earrings, they were sold to a private collector in Switzerland last month. Harrison closed his eyes briefly, absorbing this devastating news. The loss of Queen Victoria's personal jewelry to foreign hands was almost unbearable to contemplate. Who was the buyer? Can the sale be reversed? I don't know, Camilla said, wrapping her arms around herself as if trying to hold herself together. Margaret handled all the arrangements through intermediaries. She said it was safer that way, that there would be no direct connection to me. We'll need all the details you can provide, Harrison said. Though he knew the chances of recovering items already in private collections were minimal. Account numbers, contact information, anything that might help us trace the transactions. Camilla nodded weakly. What happens now, Commander? What happens to me? Harrison considered his response carefully. The woman before him was broken, defeated, and clearly remorseful. But she was also the queen consort who had betrayed the most sacred trust of her position. The decision he made in the next few moments would echo through the halls of the palace for years to come. "That depends entirely on your cooperation over the next 48 hours," he said finally, "and on how much of the damage can be undone."